The Prime Minister makes a renewed pitch for holding Lok Sabha and state elections simultaneously. Is it practical? Is it doable? Is it desirable? It's been described as unconscionable and inhumane. The Trump administration's policy of separating children from immigrant parents who unlawfully enter the US gets all-round flack. And it was an earth-shaking win, all right. Mexico's victory over defending champions Germany at the FIFA World Cup triggers a seismic event. It's Tuesday, June 19th. Observing that the country remains in perpetual election mode, Prime Minister Modi at a Niti Aayog meeting with chief ministers has pitched once again that elections to the Lok Sabha and state assemblies be held simultaneously. What do the advisory bodies and think tanks have to say? In April this year, the Law Commission put out a draft white paper recommending the holding of simultaneous elections, perhaps even as early as 2019. The Commission points out that simultaneous elections were held in the country during the first 2 decades after independence, up to 1967. Dissolution of certain assemblies in 1968 and 69, followed by the dissolution of the Lok Sabha, led to the disruption of the conduct of simultaneous elections. Simultaneous elections, the report says, may be restored by amending the constitution. How is this even practically possible, you ask? After all, in 2019, when the 5-year term of this Lok Sabha comes to an end and elections are held, how can state assemblies that would have completed varying portions of their 5-year terms be forced to dissolve and go to the polls again? Wouldn't that mean robbing the elected legislators and state governments of their legitimate mandate to govern for the period of 5 years? Well, the Law Commission's solution to that is this. In order to start synchronization, as a one-time measure, elections be held in phases. In the first phase, elections to the states which are scheduled to go to the polls synchronous with the Lok Sabha in 2019 could be held together. The rest of the states could go to elections in proximity with the Lok Sabha elections of 2024, appropriately extending the terms of the respective assemblies where required. Thereafter, simultaneous elections can be held every 5 years. Alternately, the report suggests holding elections every 2.5 years. Even if that were to be, what if the elections throw up a hung assembly or hung parliament? The report suggests that members of a house sit together and decide on a leader of the house who can form the government. Or, a member may seek the support of other political parties to form the government. Now, if a whip is issued by political parties and members of that party go against the whip and vote however they want, they can be disqualified. To avoid that, the report asks for a relaxation of the anti-defection law. What about when a no-confidence motion is brought that could potentially lead to the fall of a government and the calling of premature elections? The report suggests that a member, while moving a no-confidence motion, may also put forward an option for forming an alternative government to avoid midterm elections. Therefore, will simultaneous elections violate the concept of federalism and other constitutional provisions are all questions that need to be debated. Now, Niti Aayog, the government's policy think tank, has suggestions similar to that of the Law Commission when it comes to the practical implementation of simultaneous elections. But let's look at how the Niti Aayog makes its case for synchronized elections. Mainly, it says that the current electoral system leads to frequent imposition of the Model Code of Conduct by the Election Commission, which puts on hold the entire development program and activities of the union and state governments in the poll-bound state. It even affects normal governance. This often leads to policy paralysis and governance deficit. What is the Model Code of Conduct? The Model Code of Conduct is put in place just before an election and bars governments from announcing new schemes since it might unfairly influence voters. So, the counter to the Niti Aayog's argument is that, is it really such a big deal? The Model Code of Conduct remains in place for only around 4 to 6 weeks before an election, and it only applies to new government schemes. Other government work can continue as before. Do we really want to tamper with our existing system of democracy for a disproportionately small gain? The other argument made in favor of simultaneous elections by the Niti Aayog is that frequent elections lead to massive expenditures. Currently, the entire expenditure and actual conduct of elections to Lok Sabha is borne by the Government of India, and such expenditure on conduct of elections to state legislatures is borne by the state governments. If, the report argues, concurrent elections to the Lok Sabha and state assembly is held, then the expenditure is shared between the Government of India and respective state governments. But, as one editorial argued, election expenditure is not actually very high even now. In any case, democracy does not come cheap. Additionally, the real money problem with elections is the use of black money by candidates and political parties. And it is that kind of electoral reform our elected legislators and government should be advocating. Simultaneous elections will not solve that. What about the Election Commission? Well, the EC reportedly has an alternate plan or Plan B to the holding of simultaneous elections. It's called 1 year, 1 election. This, the EC believes, will be relatively easier to accomplish, while at the same time resolving the current problems of being perpetually in election mode. What would it entail? Currently, the Election Commission can notify elections not more than 6 months before the term of a state assembly is about to expire. By amending that provision and extending the 6-month stipulation to say 9 or 10 months, elections to all states whose term is expiring in 1 year can be held together. You're likely to have come across the hashtags "Where are the children?" and "Missing children" on social media. They refer to a controversial Trump administration policy that separates migrant families who illegally enter the country. The policy, part of US President Donald Trump's aggressive immigration agenda, has been dubbed morally questionable at best. It involves separating children from parents who face criminal prosecution for illegally crossing the border. Reuters reported that nearly 1,800 immigrant families were separated at the US-Mexico border from October 2016 through February this year. These are mostly Central Americans who make up the majority of families crossing the southwest border. Increasing violence in Central America has prompted thousands of people to cross the border into the United States seeking asylum. US authorities say there is a distinction. Those seeking asylum for legitimate reasons have to do so the right way at the official port of entry. But reports suggest the new policy is making it difficult to do so. Later this month, your Morning Fix will look at why the world is seeing its worst refugee crisis since World War II. Now, back to the US. There has been growing outrage in America over the policy. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, who went to a Federal Bureau of Prisons facility to meet with immigrant women held there, reportedly recounted stories of women being told by Border Patrol agents that their families would not exist anymore and that they would never see their children again. The Washington Post reported that a Honduran father, separated from his wife and child, suffered a breakdown at a Texas jail and killed himself. In a scathingly critical piece, former First Lady Laura Bush wrote, "I live in a border state. I appreciate the need to enforce and protect our international borders. But this zero-tolerance policy is cruel, it's immoral, and it breaks my heart. Our government should not be in the business of warehousing children in converted box stores or making plans to place them in tent cities in the desert outside of El Paso. These images are eerily reminiscent of the Japanese-American internment camps of World War II, now considered to be one of the most shameful episodes in US history." Indian airports will soon test voluntary paperless boarding for domestic flyers through Aadhaar-based unique IDs. This means you can walk into an airport, flash your Aadhaar-based unique ID, and walk straight to the security check without having to guard your boarding card with your life. What this also means is that anyone with access to the Aadhaar database can track and pull out details of all your domestic travels, when and where you went, for how long, even which class you flew. Essentially, the concerns over Aadhaar becoming a tool for mass state surveillance and even compromised security, all of which have been considered by the Supreme Court in the case challenging Aadhaar, the verdict has been reserved. India, remember, has no privacy law. Which is interesting because, fun fact, it was the first country in the world to test the practical use of biometrics through fingerprinting over a century and a half ago. The use of fingerprints in India began as early as 1850s. In 1858, William Herschel, an English civil servant posted in Jangipur in Bengal, while sealing a government deal with a local businessman, he used the handprint instead of a signature. Soon, Herschel began collecting fingerprints from pensioners for the purpose of identification. And finally, you know how sports writers use adjectives like earth-shattering and seismic to describe shock results that no one saw coming? Well, Mexico defeating defending world champions Germany at the FIFA World Cup on Sunday may just have lived up to that hyperbole. When 22-year-old Lozano put his side 1-0 ahead, celebrations were wild enough to seemingly trigger an artificial earthquake, according to a seismic monitoring network which attributed the event to massive jumps, possibly. Seriously. See you tomorrow.